It's here. Space Marine 2 has arrived, and holy shit, it's good. Which honestly rocks, because I feel like I was really banking on this being good. Either way, being a Warhammer YouTuber, I'd feel, remiss in my duties if I didn't make at least a little review about the game. So picture this. The year is 2011, and it's a big year. It's my freshman year of high school, and I'm scared of girls. But my one saving grace is that it's the year that Skyrim came out, which was fucking awesome. Fun story, me and my friend, he actually pre-ordered the game on Xbox 360, and I remember his mom picked us up from school and drove him, my pal, and me to the game store to pick up his copy. We get the game, and we head to his house, and we boot that shit up. The game starts and our character is standing outside the carriage with Ulfric Ralof and that dude from Morrixton. And if you don't know anything about Skyrim, that's actually a really common glitch, but we had no idea because we were high schoolers and we had never played the game before, so we were just running around like, hell yeah, this is great. Basically, we had the most Bethesda game experience ever. Little did we know, though, there was actually another game released in 2011, and that game was called Space Marine. You'll have to forgive me, though, this was prior to my Warhammer awakening. The game came out to okay-ish reviews, but it cemented itself in Warhammer history because it was one of the only really, really good Warhammer video games that existed at the time. You see, up until pretty recently, Warhammer games had a pretty rough reputation as well, just being straight ass. Even though Space Marine might not have been the best game ever made, it gained a pretty good following by the nature of it being a relatively rare okay entry in the long lineup of games. 3 more sequels were actually planned, but unfortunately, something terrible happened because THQ actually declared bankruptcy in 2012, so any hopes of seeing a sequel were pretty much quashed at that point. As time went on, Warhammer games got better and better. See things like the Total War series and the Dark Tides, the Vermintides, and Dawn of War, stuff like that. But none of them ever really satisfied that itch that many Warhammer gamers had. We needed a Space Marine 2, and in 2021, Focus Entertainment and Saber Interactive, they delivered. Now, I remember when they actually announced the game, the hype was palpable. Gamers were reaching a sweaty fervor every time new information dropped, and after 3 long years, the game finally came out, and the question on everyone's mind is it good? Fortunately for those of us that like Warhammer, I have good news. The game fucks. I mean, just... You hear that? First and foremost, what type of game is Space Marine? True to its predecessor, it's a third-person action shooter thing with melee. But let's break it down. First off, let's talk about gameplay. It really plays a lot like old-school games like Gears of War. It's kind of like hard to put it into words, but it just feels really good in your hands. I played on a controller, and most importantly for me as a Warhammer nerd, I think that they really managed to capture what it would feel like to be a Space Marine and translate that onto a controller. When you walk, you kind of lumber, but when you get into combat, you become fast and nimble, and you don't really lose any of that weight that comes with being, encased in ceramite and carrying a giant bolter. In regards to melee combat, I think the best way to describe it is that it's easy to pick up and hard to master, which I think is great. That's personally my favorite type of combat system. You're not going to spend hours getting your ass beat in combat at the beginning, but it's also not exactly a walk in the park. The whole system is based off of a timed parry, dodge, strike kind of thing, and you absolutely can romp around on lower difficulties hacking and slashing your way through, but the game really rewards well-timed dodges and parries. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that mastering dodging and parrying is necessary for playing at higher difficulties. In addition to looking really, really cool, a well-timed parry or dodge is rewarded with a gun execution, which can do some extra damage to enemies, and that's good because if you do enough damage to enemies, you can stagger them, which opens them up for execution. Executions are kind of going to be like your bread and butter of the game because they're going to allow you to replenish your armor in combat. And trust me, you're going to need that because there's a lot of bugs and they bite. Speaking of guns, let's talk about gunplay. It's pretty darn good. In your role as a Space Marine, you get access to a pretty wide range of weapons, from the aptly named Melt-A-Gun to long-range options like the last Fusel. One thing that I was kind of worried about when I was watching the footage prior to release is how are they going to work in long-range playstyles? The game is pretty melee-focused, but long-range playstyles are completely viable, and in some cases exceptionally strong, even at high difficulties. Unfortunately, one of my gripes with the game has to do with guns, though. This may sound kind of nitpicky, but I'm kind of not a fan of how the bolters sound. Me personally, I'm a meaty bolter noise kind of guy, like something like Dark Tide. I like my boys to have a bit of thwump, if that makes sense. In Space Marine, they sound fine, but that's about it. For me, the coolest part about combat in this game is the hordes, man. And I mean, they really put you in the thick of it, and there are a lot of bugs. It's honestly impressive, and it looks great. They really make you feel like you're just out there fighting a horde of ravenous bugs, which is awesome. And that leads me into another thing that I think the game is really great at, which is scale. When I think of Warhammer, specifically the feeling of Warhammer, I think about the scale of it. Warhammer is big. It's fucking massive. It's a lot of the times beyond comprehension. I mean, look at this fucking guy. He's huge. Scale is so important to establishing the visual language of Warhammer universe. You like that reviewer language there? And this game does it so well. You spend your time in the game roaming around between tight quarters and large open vistas, both of which are beautifully designed with no detail spared. I mean, seriously, everywhere you look is just chock full of little Warhammer details, just make you feel like the whole thing is a love letter to the universe. For me, the thing that actually gets me the most is that they use some of the terrain found on the tabletop as 3D models. I mean, obviously seeing iconic units and characters is cool, but I just fucking love it when I see a little like robot loader thing that I painted before, and it's just so cool to me. But anyways, this segues nicely into the next section, which is, in this capacity, the game is spectacular. It's a beautiful game, and I mean, just look at this shit. The only thing that I will say is that in order to take advantage of that full graphical buffet that is Space Marine 2, you're probably going to want a beefier PC. Now, you can play the game with an older rig absolutely fine. I played on a 2080 and got decent frames on high, but 4K on Ultraman, it just hits different. If you're a fan of like Warhammer at all, the story mode of this game makes it absolutely worth it. Now, I'm going to try to avoid big spoilers, but I honestly don't know how to write a review about a game story without giving at least a little bit of it away. So consider this your warning if you don't want any spoilers. Basically, this is a continuation of the first game following our good friend, Captain, now Lieutenant Titus, 200 years after the events of the first game. You get introduced to a small but interesting group of characters that have the supreme pleasure of fulfilling the Emperor's wishes through brutal acts of violence. One thing that I love personally is that we get introduced to a wide range of factions in the campaign, which really gives everyone something to love. Furthermore, there's a couple of moments that are just pure candy for anybody that's even the most shy Warhammer enjoyer. If you know, you know, but I can't stop thinking about the scene with the banner. God, it's inside of me. While story mode is awesome and definitely worth playing, I should probably mention something about the length. It's not exactly long, which can be fine, but I do need to say, without the addition of multiplayer modes, the game would kind of be lacking in content, which brings us to our next point. In addition to our campaign, we get two flavors of multiplayer, both of which I really, really enjoy. Eternal War is a PvP game mode where you get to choose a specialist class with a variety of weapons and special abilities that cater to all types of playstyles and engage in 6v6 combat over a variety of mission types, including team deathmatch, domination, capture and hold thing. Eternal War is genuinely a good time. As of right now, it's not particularly balanced and matchmaking is not great. Nevertheless, though, it's still pretty fun and definitely something you could spend a lot of time getting into. The other multiplayer mode is called Operations, and to me, this is where the gravy is at. This game mode is reminiscent of like the Tide style games or maybe even like Deep Rock Galactic. Basically, you just have 6 missions where you go with your team of 3 to try to complete the objective. You get the same 6 classes that you get with the other game mode, but you get a tree of abilities that you unlock as you level up. You can also upgrade your weapons by finding little bits of data around the maps, and most importantly, you can upgrade your drip as you play, which I love. Who doesn't love upgrading their drip? If I'm being honest, Operation is where I've spent most of my time in the game because I just love these types of games. My little lizard brain is scratched by collecting the pieces of Space Marine drip and upgrading my weapons. Just gets me. Now, one thing I don't like is that there is only 6 missions as of right now, which is fine and dandy, but man, they do get a little bit boring after a while. Fortunately, the devs have plans to add more missions, and more enemy types and more weapons as time goes on, so this is an issue that should be resolved. If you're looking for a place to start though, Bulwark is my favorite class. Currently, I've dressed my War Barbie up as a Black Templar, and man, just look at it. Tell him he's beautiful. So finally, I think we've established that the game is good, but is the game worth it? Is it a nice value? Now, this can kind of be a complicated question because it tends to be pretty subjective. However, I do think I found a more objective way of evaluating value. My gold standard of value is a dollar to hour ratio, so if I spend $70 for the game, I want to get at least 70 hours of enjoyment out of the game. And I'm glad to report that Space Marine sits well above that 1-to-1 ratio. Right now, I'm sitting at about 70 hours, and that's not even through the first season, and there's going to be way more seasons. So it's definitely worth it if you look at that metric. And there you have it, folks. Space Marine 2 really fucks. It's a great game, and I can absolutely recommend it, especially if you are a Warhammer fan. The whole thing is just lovingly crafted with the utmost attention to detail for what I'm sure is a very difficult universe to make a game for. This amount of care could make it otherwise pretty mid-game a pretty good game, but fortunately for us, Space Marine isn't otherwise mid. The feeling of combat and multiplayer modes are just spot on, which makes this game an absolute treat, even without the attention to detail. Now, I could try to give this a subjective rating outside my love for Warhammer, but fuck that. I like Warhammer, and it's my review, so I'm going to give it a 9.5 throne statues out of 10. Anyways, thank you for stopping by. There's more content on the way. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and don't forget, the only bad mini is an unpainted mini.